It's funny how routine can make you forget to be alive. I don't think I noticed that until after she walked in. It was one of those rare moments when the city felt like it was on pause. The barista at the cafe barely said anything beyond. Same as usual? He didn't need to ask. A caramel latte with oat milk, 3/4 full, never more, never less. I was already halfway through it when she appeared. The kind of woman you forget you're looking at until it's too late. Then you can't stop. That's how it went for weeks. She came in every Friday morning around the same time. Her hair always a little damp from the rain or the steam of a shower, tucked into a scarf, the edges curling just enough to make you think about her neck for too long. She'd order something like a black coffee, take it to the same seat by the window. I'd watch her sometimes, trying not to let my eyes linger too long. But I think she noticed. I think she always noticed. Today, though, the sky was that kind of gray that made everything seem smaller. The kind where you wonder if it's even worth going outside or just letting the day sink into the softness of the couch. She walked in, and, as usual, I caught the faintest flicker of recognition in her eyes. That slight lift of her eyebrows, that little smile that always seemed like she was hiding something behind it. "Hi, Jacob," she said, but I didn't respond right away. I was too busy watching her hands, those hands that always seemed to do a little more than just hold things. When she sat down at the window, she pulled out a book from her bag, something I'd seen before, something old and worn with pages curling at the edges. I stared at the cup in front of me, the sound of the spoon scraping against the porcelain as I stirred, letting my eyes drift to the way she ran her thumb along the edge of the cup. Small, quiet movements, but everything in me felt it. "Same order again?" the barista asked, his voice breaking my thoughts. I looked at him, nodded. When I turned back, she was gone. The empty seat by the window was all that was left, and for a moment, I wondered if it was an accident that I'd been the one to notice, or if it was some kind of strange, quiet thing we'd both been pretending we didn't see. I spent the rest of the morning with my head full of her, of that fleeting moment where she stood in the doorway just long enough to make me wonder if maybe this could go somewhere. Maybe the way she glanced over her shoulder before walking out was an invitation, or maybe it was just the cold rain slapping against the glass. I checked my phone again, 3 texts left unsent. She hadn't texted me once. But still, I couldn't shake that moment. The way her eyes softened when I smiled. How she always said my name just a little slower than necessary, like she wanted to see if I'd notice. Just as I stood to leave, I caught sight of her again. She was walking out the door, but then she paused, almost like she had forgotten something. She looked back at me, just a quick glance, but something in her face had changed. It wasn't the same smile, but something almost shy, almost uncertain. She bit her lip, then turned her back to me, walking out into the rain. I swallowed hard, hesitating at the door, not knowing whether to go after her or let it slip away like every other thing that had never been said. My phone buzzed, cutting through the silence of the moment. I checked it. A text from her. "Would you mind coming by? I've misplaced something." And just like that, I felt the quiet hum of possibility, threading itself through the ordinary noise of the day. I had no idea what I was walking into, but I was about to find out. I was only halfway to her house when I started to wonder if I was doing something stupid. The rain had turned into that cold mist that gets in your bones, but it wasn't the weather that made my chest tight. It was the idea of what I was walking into. I'd been to her place before, a couple of times, but always as a friend, always with my buddy Ethan tagging along. We'd hang out, talk about nothing, her warm laughter filling the space. But tonight was different. No one else was coming, and that small thing, that little shift, was enough to make my stomach feel like it was twisting around a knot. I knocked once, twice. The door creaked open, just enough for her to peek through. "Jacob." Her voice was a little softer than usual, a little uncertain, like she hadn't expected me to show. Your text," I said, shrugging awkwardly, trying to keep my cool. But inside, I was wondering if this was one of those moments where things could get complicated. She stepped back, letting me in, and I could feel the warmth of her apartment wrap around me, the scent of something cooking in the air, a subtle perfume mixed with the faint smell of tea leaves. She didn't close the door right away, standing there for a second, watching me. "You should have called," she said quietly. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded, feeling the weight of something unsaid in the air. Maybe it was the way her eyes lingered on me, or maybe it was the way my pulse picked up just a little bit faster every time she moved in my direction. She motioned to the kitchen. I was just about to make some tea. "Would you like some?" "Yeah," I said, finding myself almost grateful for the excuse to break the silence. "That sounds good." I sat at the small kitchen table, watching her as she moved around the space. The way she poured the water, the way her hands wrapped around the cup just a little too tightly. It all felt like I was watching her from some distance, like I shouldn't be here. "So," I started, the words coming out slowly, unsure. "What was it you misplaced?" She turned, glancing at me. Her lips parted, then closed again, like she was deciding how much to say. "Nothing, really," she said, too quickly. Just a book I've been looking for." I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something else. She hadn't invited me here just for a missing book. "I know Ethan's been busy," I said, trying to keep it casual. "I guess that's why you're—" She froze, a tightness in her shoulders, before she set the kettle down on the stove. "Jacob," she said, her voice lowering, "I don't think either of us really wants to talk about Ethan right now." I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. I looked down at my hands, and I could feel her eyes on me, studying me, maybe waiting for me to back away. When the tea was ready, she brought over 2 cups, and we sat across from each other, neither of us speaking. The sound of the rain against the window, the ticking of the clock, everything felt louder in the silence between us. And then, out of nowhere, she reached across the table, her hand resting on mine for just a second, a quiet touch that held more weight than it had any right to. It wasn't like a lover's touch. Not yet. It was just a moment of connection, brief and fragile. But it stayed with me longer than anything else had that night. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. I thought, staring at my fingers, still warm from where she'd touched me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. The tea had gone cold between us. Neither of us moved to drink it, though I was sure we both knew it was probably the only thing keeping us from saying whatever we were thinking. I kept my eyes on the rim of the cup, watching the steam dissipate, pretending that my thoughts weren't tangled in her presence. I had no idea why I felt so out of place. Her house was warm, comfortable, but I felt like an intruder, a ghost. "So," she said, breaking the silence, her voice soft but with an edge I hadn't heard before. "What have you been up to lately?" I could tell she wasn't really asking, not about my day or what I had for lunch. It was just a way to fill the space between us, to distract herself from whatever it was we were both trying to avoid. "Same old," I said, my voice lower than usual. I wanted to say more, to tell her how much the silence between us was pressing down on me, but I wasn't sure she'd want to hear it. I wasn't sure if I was even allowed to say it. Her fingers played with the handle of her cup, twisting it in little circles, as if her mind was elsewhere. "Ethan's been busy. He's out of town this weekend." There it was. The thing we couldn't avoid. The thing that made everything feel too close to the edge. I didn't want to think about it. Not when she was sitting so close to me, her hand still warm from where it had touched mine. I should probably go," I said suddenly, standing up before the words had even fully formed. It felt too heavy, too close. Her gaze followed me, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. She just looked at me, as if weighing something she hadn't yet voiced. I turned, my hand halfway to the door. It was stupid, I knew that. I was doing this to protect myself, to back away from something that was too big for me to handle. But just as I reached for the doorknob, I heard her stand up behind me, the soft shuffle of her slippers against the floor. "Jacob," she said, her voice softer now, almost pleading, like she wanted me to stay. "Don't go." I froze, my hand still on the door, my pulse quickening. I hadn't expected her to say that. She had always been so calm, so collected. And now, there was something raw in her voice, something vulnerable that made my throat tighten. I turned back slowly, and she was standing a few feet away, her body tense but her eyes locked on mine. I couldn't breathe. I'm not sure what you want from me," she said, and it was the first time I'd heard her sound uncertain. Her words were fragile, like she was testing them out, trying to make sense of something neither of us had spoken aloud. I didn't know what to say to that. So much had been left unsaid already. So much between us was tangled in the space we shared, but nothing had ever been as clear as it was in that moment. I wanted to step toward her. I wanted to cross that invisible line, but my feet wouldn't move. I was rooted to the floor, caught between desire and fear. And then she did something I didn't expect. She took a step toward me, closing the distance, but not enough to touch me. She was so close now, close enough that I could feel her breath, but still so far away. Her eyes searched mine, like she was waiting for me to make the first move. I could feel it. I could feel the pull, the tension between us, but the moment was fractured, a mirror on the edge of breaking. "Jacob," she whispered, and just as my mind raced to answer, the doorbell rang, a sharp interruption that split the moment in half. I stepped back, my breath shaky. The doorbell rang again. I didn't know what to do. It was a quiet night, the kind that felt too long without words but too short with them. We had gone for a walk, not because we needed to, but because there was nothing else left to do. The streets were empty, the pavement still wet from the rain that had stopped hours ago. We walked side by side, but not close enough to touch. She had suggested it. Just a walk. No need for anything else, she'd said when I hesitated at the door. The calmness in her voice felt like she was already a step ahead of me, but I followed her anyway. Neither of us spoke. The only sound was our footsteps against the wet pavement, the soft tap of shoes on stone. The park was quiet, the swings swaying in the wind like forgotten toys. We passed a bench, and she stopped, her hand lingering on the back of it. For a moment, she seemed like she was looking for an excuse to sit, or maybe for an excuse to stay close to me. But she didn't sit. "Do you ever feel like you're just waiting for something?" she asked, her voice quieter than before. I glanced at her. She was looking out over the empty park, her profile just visible under the streetlights. She was waiting for me to answer, but I didn't know how. I could feel it in the space between us, a weight that was impossible to ignore. I had been thinking about it all day, about the way she looked at me, about the touch that had lingered far too long. But it was more than that, more than the pull between us. "I don't know," I said, shifting on my feet. "Maybe I'm just waiting for the right moment to not mess everything up." She glanced at me, and for a second, I saw something flicker in her eyes, something like pain or regret. But it was gone before I could name it. "Maybe that moment's already gone," she said softly, almost to herself. I swallowed, feeling a rush of heat in my chest. The words hit too hard, like something I had been avoiding was suddenly too close. "No," I said quickly, shaking my head. "I don't think it is." She turned toward me, her gaze sharp, like she was studying me now. "You're young, Jacob. You have so much ahead of you." She gestured between us, her fingers catching in the air like she was trying to shape the words. "This isn't something you need to be tangled in. Not with me." I could feel the space closing in between us, but my throat was tight, and I couldn't bring myself to move any closer. But I stopped myself. What could I say? I was scared of what I wanted, scared of what this was turning into. "I don't know what to do," I finally admitted, my voice shaky. "Every time I look at you, it feels like I'm crossing a line, but I can't." I trailed off, my hands in my pockets, my heart thumping. I wanted to reach out to her, to say it all, but the words felt like they would destroy something. She took a breath, a long one. It felt like she was about to say something important, something final. But instead, she just exhaled softly and took a small step back, as if the distance between us was both too much and not enough. "You don't have to do anything, Jacob," she said, her voice almost too calm. I don't know if I'm the right person for you." The words hit me harder than I expected, a quiet finality in them that I didn't know how to handle. She wasn't looking at me anymore, not directly. Her gaze had shifted to the ground, and her shoulders were a little slumped, like she had already said everything she needed to say. I wanted to ask her if that was really true, if she felt it too, but I didn't. Instead, I stood there, frozen, unsure of whether to take a step toward her or walk away. "Are you sure?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes met mine for a second. She didn't answer. The days after that night felt like they were stretching longer than they should have. I kept expecting her to call, or text, or even just show up at the cafe. But nothing came. The silence between us was louder than anything I could imagine, like a door closing and locking with no way to unlock it. I couldn't stop thinking about what she had said. "I don't know if I'm the right person for you." But I also couldn't stop thinking about the way she had looked at me, the way she hadn't quite said goodbye. Something was still there. I just didn't know what it was. I started showing up at the cafe again, hoping I'd see her. But every time I walked in, it was just the usual routine. The barista, the half-full latte, the quiet hum of people typing away on their laptops. Her chair by the window was always empty. It didn't make sense, and it was driving me crazy. Then, a week later, I finally saw her. She was with someone else. I hadn't expected it. She was sitting at a table near the back, a man beside her, a familiar one. A man I hadn't seen in a while. Ethan. I didn't know why, but seeing them together like that felt like a punch in the chest. They were laughing, sharing a quiet conversation over a cup of coffee, their bodies leaning slightly toward each other. She looked different, lighter, more at ease. But there was something else, something in the way they exchanged glances that made my stomach drop. I stood there, frozen, half hidden behind a stack of newspapers, unsure if I should walk out or pretend I hadn't seen anything. I didn't know what to do, so I did nothing. They didn't notice me. They didn't even look up. I couldn't help but feel like I was the one who had missed the memo on what this was supposed to be. I couldn't help but feel like I was the one who had made everything harder. But then something shifted. As if on cue, Ethan's phone rang, and he excused himself, stepping outside to take the call. It was just the two of us now. She glanced up at the door, then at me, and for a brief moment, our eyes locked. My heart skipped a beat. There was something there, something I couldn't quite place. But then, without a word, she looked away. Her fingers tightened around her cup, and she stared out the window, her expression unreadable. I didn't know what to do. I was still standing at the counter, barely breathing, when Ethan returned, his presence filling the space again. The warmth between them seemed to return, too. She leaned toward him, her hand brushing against his, just a little too familiar, just a little too much like they had never stopped being them. I turned and left, my footsteps faster than I meant them to be. The whole walk home, I felt that tightness in my chest again, the thing I had been trying to ignore. I didn't text her. I didn't call. The silence between us stretched out even further. I wanted to ask her why. I wanted to ask if Ethan was really the one she had been waiting for all along. But I didn't. Instead, I stood outside my apartment door, my hand hovering over my phone, ready to type a message, ready to send something. Anything that would make this make sense. But I didn't. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. I found myself back at her door again, this time without any clear reason for it. Maybe I had been waiting for something to push me here. Maybe it was just the weight of all the silence that had built up between us. But whatever it was, it had brought me to her doorstep. I had texted her, just once, but the message had gone unanswered. And still, here I was, holding my phone like a crumpled note, a gesture I wasn't sure meant anything anymore. I knocked once. A soft knock. She answered almost immediately, as though she had been expecting me. "Jacob," she said, her voice warm, but with that edge of hesitation that had crept in over the past week. I could see her eyes, bright but guarded. The same woman I had seen so many times before, and yet not. "I didn't know if you'd." She stopped herself, eyes flicking to the side for a moment. as if she were sorting through her thoughts. Then, in one fluid motion, she stepped aside and let me in without a word. The apartment felt quieter than it had before, almost like she was holding her breath, waiting for me to say something. Anything. But I didn't know where to begin. The kitchen was lit with the soft glow of the overhead light. She was standing near the counter, fidgeting with a tea towel in her hands, not meeting my gaze. I wanted to ask her about Ethan, why she hadn't told me about him, why things felt so twisted between us. But I couldn't. We both knew the answer was buried in the space we hadn't spoken. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice almost too low to hear, but I heard it. "I shouldn't have left you hanging like that." I swallowed. The words had been building inside me for days, but I couldn't make them come out. "It's not just that," I said quietly, almost to myself. "I don't know what this is, what we're doing. I don't know if I'm the right person for you, either." Her eyes finally met mine. For the first time, I saw something fragile in her expression, something real. "We're both figuring this out," she said softly. Her hands, still clutched around the towel, tightened slightly. I think maybe we both need time to figure out what we want, what we can actually have." I nodded slowly, unsure of whether I should say more or just leave it there. Her gaze softened, and she took a slow step forward, closing the small gap between us, until there was barely any space at all. We stood there, close, but not touching, both of us waiting for the other to make the next move. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, but this time, her hand reached up, brushing against my arm. A small, simple gesture. A touch that said everything I hadn't known how to say. I couldn't breathe for a second. The vulnerability in her action was louder than any words could have been. "Okay," I said, barely above a whisper. The words didn't seem to carry much weight, but the way she looked at me in that moment, the way she just nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, made it feel like something had shifted, something small and fragile, but important. It wasn't an ending. It wasn't even a resolution. It was just a pause, a space between us, wide and open, and in that quiet moment, I finally understood that it was okay to leave things unsaid. And maybe that was all we needed. Time passed, not quickly or dramatically, but in that way that life has of quietly turning. We didn't have a conversation about what had happened between us, not really. But in the days that followed, the distance between us started to shrink, not with any big gestures, but with small, careful things. I started showing up at the cafe again. She was always there, in the same spot by the window, her fingers wrapped around a cup of black coffee, just like before. It had become a ritual of sorts, that moment of seeing her from across the room, of watching her sip her coffee, not looking for me, but somehow aware of me in the way she'd smile when our eyes met. She didn't have to say anything anymore. It was just that quiet acknowledgement, like we both knew, without needing to define it, that we were learning how to be with each other. Sometimes, after a long day, I'd find her in her kitchen, making tea. The kettle would whistle softly as she poured the boiling water into a cup, the steam rising into the air, the dim light from the kitchen lamp casting a warm glow over everything. It wasn't the grand gestures that made it feel real, but the small, shared moments that had started to settle into our routines. One evening, she looked up from her cup of tea and said, "I'm glad you're here." It wasn't anything profound, but it felt like something was finally understood between us. I didn't say it back right away, but I thought it quietly. And then, one morning, as I walked into the cafe and saw her sitting there, her eyes lifting to meet mine, I knew. I wasn't afraid anymore. I had stopped trying to figure it out. I had stopped waiting for some kind of answer. We didn't talk about Ethan. We didn't talk about the things we had danced around for weeks. We simply existed in the quiet spaces between us, the pauses and silences no longer something to fear, but a part of the rhythm of what was becoming a real thing. I'd never realized how much I needed that quiet. It was the kind of love that didn't need to be shouted, but understood in the way she moved through the world, in the way I felt her presence in the smallest of actions. A hand brushing mine as she passed me a cup of tea, The look she gave me when I stepped into her kitchen after a long day. Life wasn't perfect. There were still moments of hesitation, moments when I questioned whether this was enough. But then I'd see her sitting in that spot by the window, sipping her black coffee, and it felt like I had found a place that wasn't about needing to change anything. It was simply about being. It was enough. And one day, as the sky darkened outside and the first drops of rain hit the window pane, she turned to me and smiled softly. "I think we've figured it out, haven't we?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't need to answer. The words were there in the way she held my gaze, in the way we both knew this was no longer a pause, no longer an uncertainty. It was just a quiet, real beginning. And it felt like home. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?